All right, hey guys, welcome back. It's Gene. I've got another video for you today, this time about the approach phase in the PC-12, and I had a viewer ask a question about how we handle a slam dunk approach in the airplane, which is an approach where ATC hangs you up high close into the airport, and or they assign a speed that you have to maintain until a certain distance from the airport, so you end up with excess energy close in that you have to shed. And like I mentioned in my last video, the PC-12 slows down very nicely, so energy management in this airplane is really no big deal at all, which is not the case in all airplanes. Faster airplanes, a lot of jets, you do have to plan much more carefully. But in the PC-12, we really have a lot of flexibility in terms of speed close in, which is great. So I thought I'd walk you through a flight that I took in real life in the Washington Dulles Airport here, where I was assigned speeds. And this is very typical when you're flying into a big, busy Class B airport like Dulles with a lot of traffic, that you're going to have to mix in. So you're going to be mixing in with airline traffic and faster airplanes. And the great thing about the PC-12 is it's very speed diverse, and most controllers know that about the airplane. Our VMO speed, which is our maximum operating speed, is 236 knots indicated airspeed. So most jets in the terminal area aren't going even that fast. So we can go, so long as it's not too turbulent, all the way up to 236 knots and keep pace with any other airplane, all the way up to wide body jets or, any other airplane in the terminal area, because they're usually not going that fast anyway, this close into the airport. So ATC will normally assign speeds to all aircraft if it's busy. And like I said, flying into Dulles anytime except for maybe overnight, it is going to be busy. And you're going to get speeds assigned pretty far out. So everyone's going to be flying similar speeds, whether you're flying a PC-12 or a 747. And typical speeds that you'll be assigned are 210 knots or 180 knots. And I'll walk you through that here in a second. So the nice thing about flying the PC-12 is we can slow all the way down to 80 knots, or we can go as fast as 236 knots. We have a pretty wide speed envelope, which helps when we have to mix in with larger traffic when we're flying into an airport like this. Now, obviously up in the cruise, there's no way we can keep pace with airline jets and things like that, but in the terminal area, we certainly can. And in fact, there have been many times when I'm flying the PC-12 into an airport like this that I'm asked to slow down because I'm gaining on airliners. So anyway, I'll just walk you through this flight. Kind of recreated this from memory the best I could, but I was coming in on an arrival from the Northwest, and somewhere out here, kind of in this vicinity, 20 to 25 miles from the airport is just where I'm going to pick up this scenario. And out here, normally you're not assigned a speed yet, so if it's smooth, and I have some notes here, 235 knots indicated airspeed, I'm not going to be exactly right on my red line. I might be a couple knots shy of that just so I don't overspeed the airplane. And if I don't have any speed restrictions, meaning ATC hasn't assigned me a speed, or there is not a speed restriction on the arrival that I'm cleared to fly, because whether or not we're told to descend via an arrival, we still have to maintain the speeds on the arrival. So if there are speed restrictions on there, so long as ATC hasn't said delete speed restrictions, we do have to follow those speed restrictions. But if we don't have any of that, and so long as, it's light turbulence or less, if it's smooth or, just a couple of bumps, then I'm going to be flying along as fast as I can until ATC slows me down at right around 235 knots. So that might be 20 to 25 miles from the airport out here somewhere. And then as soon as we get into about 15 to 20 miles from the airport, normally somewhere in that area, it could be a little bit farther out, again, depending on the airport and the traffic flow that day. ATC is usually going to slow you down to 210 knots indicated airspeed assigned. So somewhere right in the vicinity of maybe this tick mark here, and again, just kind of a rough estimate, you'll be assigned 210 knots, for example. That's a very typical speed assignment that you'll get. Can be different, of course, but these are just general rules of thumb. So ATC will say reduce speed to 210, and then you slow down to 210. Now, the PC-12, at least the Legacy and the NG, does not have auto throttle, so nor does it have an airspeed bug, in the Legacy at least. So you just kind of have to remember what you're assigned and just watch the needle and make sure that you fly that airspeed. You can't set the autopilot to do that for you. So it does take a little bit of additional focus and concentration. You're not normally staring at your speed. Especially when you're getting into a busy terminal area like this and you're busy kind of doing other things. So you do have to kind of remember to, make sure that you're staying on your assigned speed. So somewhere out here, 15 to 20 miles out, you'll be assigned 210 knots, let's say. And then getting in a little bit closer, 10 to 15 miles out, they'll slow you down to 180 knots. So again, that's what pretty much every jet or every aircraft that's in the arrival sequence is going to be assigned, whether you're a 737 or a PC-12. You know, when you're 15 to 20 miles out, if it's busy, you're going to be assigned 210. 10 to 15 miles out, you're going to be assigned 180. And again, they'll vary that a little bit to sequence people, but that's a pretty good rule of thumb as to what you're going to see. So VLO in the Legacy is 177 knots indicated airspeed. VLO is a landing gear operating speed, which is the maximum speed at which you can cycle the gear, meaning extend or retract the gear. So it's the gear in transit speed. Now, once the gear is down and locked, you can actually speed all the way back up to VMO, 236 knots. But to actually extend the gear, we've got to be at or below 177 knots. And I put that here because the PC-12 does not have speed brakes that come out of the wings. So we kind of use the landing gear as a speed brake sometimes if we have to do that. So our speed that we have to mind for that is 177 knots. So let's say that we're flying along at 180 knots and we're pretty close in and we really need to slow down in a hurry. Well, we're above our VFE speed, which is over here for flaps 15, which is 163 knots. But we can slow down just a few knots to 177 knots and then go ahead and extend the gear. And we get a lot of extra drag from the gear that can help slow us down to where we're within flap range. And then we can start to dump the flaps in on schedule. And if we pull the power back to idle, extend the gear, get some flaps out, I mean, it's like throwing a parachute out the back. The airplane's really going to slow down nicely. So again, energy management, piece of cake in the PC-12. But anyway, just continuing along. So if, now we're slowed down to 180 knots and we're on a, kind of a dog leg or a modified base leg here, which is typical that you'll see. And then you're asked to join final. Oftentimes, if there's traffic behind you that's faster than you, or even if, kind of they're keeping everybody on the same speeds regardless of aircraft type if it's busy. A common assignment is to be asked to maintain 170 knots to a 5-mile final, which is roughly right where this tick mark is here. So on this particular flight, these were the speeds that I was assigned. It's also very common at a large airport like this, even if it's VFR and it's good VMC, the weather's fine, to ask to join the localizer. So you do want to have the ILS tuned in, even if you're going to be flying a visual approach. It's just something you kind of have to know to do at a large airport. So when you're way out, 30 miles from the airport, 40 miles from the airport, and you check on with approach and you let them know you have the ATIS, they're going to tell you what approach to expect. And if the weather's good, they might say expect visual approach runway 19 center, which is this runway right here in my example. And at a smaller airport, if you're told to expect a visual approach, you wouldn't have to worry about tuning in an ILS unless you were going to do that anyway, just for redundancy. But at a large airport, whatever runway you're told to expect, go ahead and tune in the ILS, even if you're not going to fly the ILS, because chances are the controller at some point is going to ask you to join the localizer for that runway. And you don't want to be fumbling at the last minute trying to find the approach chart and get the localizer frequency tuned in and get that set up to do that. So you want to have that set up and tuned in and ready to go. So sure enough, on this day, when I was on the kind of the modified base leg out here, I was told to join the localizer. I had it tuned in. This is a little excerpt from the approach plate for the ILS 19 center right here. And not only will they often ask you to join the localizer, but they'll usually, if it's busy, use a fix on the approach to assign a speed. So FIMCO right here is the final approach fix on the ILS 19 center. So they might say maintain 170 knots until FIMCO. So you want to know where that is. So if you have that set into the avionics, you're good to go. You don't have to worry about it. So one more reason to get that tuned in. But anyway, so join the localizer, and then I was asked to maintain 170 knots to a 5-mile final, which is roughly FIMCO. I think it was actually a little bit outside of FIMCO. FIMCO, you can see, is 5.8 DME from AML VOR DME, which is this VOR down here. So roughly 5 miles right around FIMCO. And At that point, at 170 knots, you can have the gear extended because you're below 170, but you cannot have the flaps extended yet because you're above 163. So, 170 in the PC-12, I wouldn't exactly say that it's hauling, but it's definitely not going slow. When you have a VREF speed of 80 knots, I mean, you got 90 knots, you're going to have to shed over 5 miles. Again, it's really not a problem at all. In a jet, not necessarily a problem, but again, something you might have to, watch a little bit more closely. Not that it's a big deal, but in the PC-12, it's a no-brainer. So, so when you get to a 5 mile final, you don't exactly just want to slam on the brakes and slow down to your final approach speed because especially if you have good situational awareness, you've been listening to the ATC frequency, that there's a Southwest 737 behind you and they can only slow down. They're only going to slow down to maybe 130, 140 knots, their final approach speed. You don't just want to, throw the chutes out right here at 5 miles and slow down to like 80 knots and completely screw over everybody behind you on the approach. They're not going to be happy with you, nor is ATC going to be real thrilled about that. So you want to just kind of keep going as fast as you can safely down final inside of 5 miles. So I might slow down a little bit after I cross that 5 mile final mark. In this case, I'm allowed to do that. My restriction was only 170 knots to a 5 mile final. So I might slow down to 150 knots, go ahead and get 15 degrees of flaps out. I may or may not have the gear down at that point until I'm maybe 2 or 3 miles out, and then I would slow down a little bit more. And I want to be on a visual approach, I want to be stabilized by 500 feet, which is pretty darn close into the airport. That's going to be somewhere right around a mile final, a little bit outside of a mile final. So I could go pretty fast all the way out to let's say a mile and a half before I really need to be configured with 30 degrees of flaps if I'm landing with flaps 30. The gear down, before landing checklist complete, trimmed up, stabilized by, right around a mile final. That's a good thing to do in the airplane at a big airport like this if you can safely. So now on an instrument approach, if you're in IMC and you're going to be shooting the approach to close to minimums, you're just going to have to slow down a little bit more, a little bit farther out, and ATC is just going to have to deal with it. So you can't be screaming down final in IMC and breaking out at 200 feet and trying to reconfigure the airplane. That is not safe at all. So you wouldn't do that on an instrument approach, but on a visual approach, you can do that safely. You can fly a little bit faster, a little bit closer and safely. So yeah, anyway, just get stabilized by 500 feet and then just make a normal landing. And then at a big airport like this, you're going to want to take the first high-speed taxiway exit that you can, because chances are there's going to be traffic pretty close in behind you on final that needs you to get off the runway so they don't have to go around. And you're just going to take that exit and then get your taxi instructions from ground and keep on rolling. So anyway, yeah, I hope that helps. Again, no big deal to slow the airplane down in a hurry if you need to. The airplane mixes in these high density traffic areas very well. ATC knows that, so they don't normally worry about getting you spaced in between the airliners. It's normally kind of a piece of cake so long as you try to help them out by going as fast as you can, as close in as you can safely. And they kind of know what to expect, most of them, if they've worked PC-12s before. So it's usually no big deal. All right, thanks for the question. Hope that helps. And let me know what other questions you guys have. Anything else you'd like me to go over? I always love hearing from you. And hope everyone's having a nice holiday season out there. I will see you guys on the next video. Thanks for watching.